Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, a serial porch pooper was identified by police, but they're not charging or releasing his identity because they found out he has autism. I'll go into why we need to ask a little bit more questions and have a little bit more answers and explanation than simply autism to excuse the porch pooping. Also, the medical marijuana licensing window has closed here in Kentucky, and with that came non-refundable licenses. I'll go over to why the entire process already is laying a whole lot of fertile ground for corruption, and goes to show how it will probably be run just exactly the same way that gambling's run in the state. Whether you agree with either or both, you cannot ignore the fact it's clearly government picking and choosing winners and losers. We'll go over just how crazy it is and how crazy it's gotten. We've seen universities like UK, U of L, Northern Kentucky University getting rid of their DEI departments in their colleges and universities. Is this cause for celebration? Should we be happy about this? I'll go into why this is really just a cynical deal going on between leadership in the legislature and these universities in order to try to avoid a situation where a anti-DEI bill comes forward in the legislature like it did last year. Then finally, we've had a school shooting in Georgia recently. Obviously, we've had the I-75 Laurel County shooting here in Kentucky. And amongst those things going on, we've heard a renewed call for gun control. So we'll go into some of the cries that just do something and why those individuals calling for those gun control would be better off just being quiet, because at least then they wouldn't be distracting the conversation away from real solutions. We'll go into all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. But before we dig down into it, please make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. You can also head over to theandrewshow.com. Hit the Listen Now tab. This show comes out Monday through Friday, and you can listen to it in the podcast format. This is the only video episode of the week, but you can listen to the audio formats every weekday, and you can do that by going ahead and heading over to theandrewshow.com and hitting the Listen Now tab. But without further ado, let's get into it. I do want to deal with the elephant in the room, and I am standing for this show. We'll leave it at that. I'm just standing today, so get over it. So recently, we've seen a story coming out of Louisville regarding a porch pooper, a serial porch pooper, actually targeting this same household. Here's a WDRB report regarding the incident. Let's take a listen to that.
Okay. It happened again. The so-called porch pooper popped a squat at an old Louisville home, and it was caught on camera. Police looking for the one doing the number two. It's a story we first told you about last week.
Now, you would think this should be a pretty straightforward story. In fact, this had been going on for about a week now, and I hadn't reported on it yet. It hadn't made it into any of my shows yet, and there's a reason why. This was pretty ridiculous. It's a funny story, obviously. It's kind of funny that somebody's pooping on somebody's porch repeatedly. But it shouldn't really be much of a political situation. But then something occurred with the incidents to turn it into where now we need to discuss it on a political show. Because the police did end up identifying who the porch pooper is, but they're now refusing to release that individual's identity or charge them because the individual has autism, which we shouldn't just leave alone. We should ask more questions here. Now, if it was a situation where the police identified who the porch pooper was, the porch pooper's family, kid's autistic, he seems to be an adult according to the videos. He's about 20-ish, 25 or so years old. So the adult with autism, his family and the neighbor, maybe they work out as, well, I'm assuming neighbor, but the individual whose porch was repeatedly being pooped on, maybe they worked out some sort of agreement. He'd drop the charges. The kid would, come over and help around the house maybe, or some sort of agreement that way. Maybe if that's what they arrived at, that would make sense. But they didn't say that the homeowner dropped the charges. No, they said the police are choosing not to charge him. It's been very specific about that. And the claim that, well, we're not going to do anything in this situation because they have autism seems a little ridiculous to me for a few reasons. First, I'm not going to pretend to be an autism expert. I'm not. Those of you who listen to Friday's show, no, once again, we're talking about kids with special needs there. And I made it clear there. I'm not an autism expert in no way, shape, or form. But we do have some questions to be asked, because when I see the video that was played, and you all who are watching the video format saw the WDRB report where they played the video of the porch pooper, they seem to be self-aware of what they're doing. They're walking up, they're looking around, they're checking their surroundings. At one point, they rang the doorbell. And so that seems to engage in a behavior of knowing what you're doing is wrong. But let's just take it at face value. We cannot charge this individual because they lack the mental capacity to be charged with a crime. Well, that would mean they would be the ward would have a guardian, an adult or guardian that is essentially their caretaker, that is like their parent, the same way a child has a parent. If you're saying that that person is mentally unable to be charged with pooping on a porch because they don't understand why it's wrong, well, then what you're saying is that would be equivalent to young children not knowing that they should be pooping on a porch. If you can't be charged with it, well, clearly then you must have somebody else in your life who is taking accountability for you. And so let's compare this to a mental age of a child. So how old would a child be in order to excuse them not knowing they cannot poop on a porch? 6 years old, maybe at the oldest, 7 on the high side. But let's say 6 years old. Remember the story here. This was an individual coming out at 1, 2, 3 a.m., obviously traveling a fair amount of houses, I think, because obviously in my head, if it was a next door neighbor and the guy was going next door pooping on the porch, the neighbor would have recognized them on the Ring doorbell cameras, or Nest camera, I think that was a Nest camera, would have identified them on the Nest camera, would have known immediately who was pooping on their porch. But they didn't know that. So that tells me they live at least several houses down. Now imagine the story was a 6-year-old child has been getting out of their house at 1, 2, 3 a.m. on repeatedly several nights in the row, going down several houses down, pooping on a porch. We'd be demanding somebody get charged with neglect, somebody get charged with, not taking accountability for that kid. So if the person is mentally incapable of being charged, then the person taking care of them has failed their duties by allowing them to leave the house at 1, 2, 3 a.m. And you would expect there to be charges for neglect. And I'm not trying to sound extreme in this matter. You may think, come on, just let it go. It's an autistic guy pooping on a porch. But I think it goes to the overall thing that we're seeing in society of where we feel bad, we show sympathy for the perpetrators, but the idea that victims never cross our mind. Because we think to ourselves, well, if you'd grown up poor, you would be robbing the store too. Or if you're not addicted to drugs, but if they were addicted to drugs, we have to feel bad for them because other people are, and you don't know what that's like. And we need to worry about rehabilitating them, and never mind that they've stolen or even committed violent crimes. They're incapable of making better decisions. We infantilize people in general, or at least we push an idea that nobody can take accountability. If the autistic kid in this case is like an infant, and that's why they can't take accountability, then the adult in this situation should, the way we would do anywhere else. Because we hear these calls, it's about rehabilitation and it's about helping out the person perpetrating the crime, but the victim in these circumstances, they didn't ask to be victims. They're more innocent than the individual committing the crimes. Well, we'll be back to talk about the marijuana business already seeing potential for corruption after this short break. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Just last year, the chairperson of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Licensing Board, Vernon Johnson, 70, was sentenced to serve 55 months in federal prison in connections to the bribery that was going on with handing out the state's marijuana licenses. Also recently, within the past year or two, the Los Angeles Times has talked about some of the problems that have occurred since California has legalized marijuana through their licensing system, saying that since California voters legalized recreational cannabis, allegations of conflicts of interest, bribery, and bias in the permitting process have plagued cities and counties as they try to regulate the fledgling industry. The accusations have led to a series of high-profile arrests, prosecutions of local government officials, and pot operators. The FBI has actually issued a statement on the problem in 2019 saying states require licenses to grow and sell the drug, opening the possibility for public officials to become susceptible to bribes in exchange for those licenses. The Cato Institute actually talks about how the problem is not all that unknown, and it especially becomes a problem when we have artificial or seemingly chosen for random reasons caps on how many cannabis sellers or dispensaries there can be, instead of just opening it up and letting anybody sell it. Now, if you're in the realm, as many people are, that they're against the idea of medical marijuana, what I'm about to talk to you about should still upset you, and it should be part of the reason why that this was never clearly about any kind of medicine, as we talk about how Kentucky has handled the situation. And if you're somebody who's for the legalization of at least medical marijuana, maybe you don't fall into the category of recreational marijuana, this should upset you as well, because if this is actually a medicine, as it's sold to us that it is, then the way the government is handling it here in Kentucky should absolutely disgust you. So Kentucky is embarking on this journey. And so for those of you who are against the use of medical marijuana, for now they're moving forward. Obviously, the argument and debates still wage over whether it's a good idea, a bad idea. And obviously, I think a lot of the pushback on medical marijuana comes in because, one, it's treated how I'm about to talk about it. It's not treated like it's an actual drug with health benefits, but rather just a stair step towards recreational marijuana. And a lot of people have issues with marijuana becoming another recreational drug of use, and the pretending that it's super non-addictive and not hurtful and doesn't cause any problems isn't exactly true. And obviously the arguments of, adults, consenting adults that aren't hurting anybody else should be allowed to do what they can do. That is also an argument that can sway people to the other side. But this isn't about your actual support or not for medical marijuana. It's about the facts of what's happening here in Kentucky. And what I'm seeing is telling me that this is exactly going to turn out the same way as our gambling industry has. And that's just par for the course for Kentucky, who just over the past few years was rated as one of the most corrupt, legally corrupt, as well as illegally corrupt states in the country due to things like this. Let me describe what's going on here. So here in Kentucky, the rules on how many licenses they're going to hand out. Now remember what the Cato Institute said. They said artificial caps on licensing that are just chosen for no particularly good reason, that are chosen at random seemingly, are part of the problem. So you'd think Kentucky, looking at it, would say, look, as long as you pass XYZ things, then you can be licensed by the state to operate and be a business. Now, if I was, of course, if I was forced to write this policy, I'm not saying I would want to do this or not, but if I was forced to say okay to this, I would have at least handed off the licensing as well to allow more local counties and things to get involved in the process, states be more hands-off. Because remember, and I tell this to people who are for recreational marijuana all the time and talk to me about it, I'll let them know. I'll say, look, you're talking to a state right now where not even alcohol is legal to be sold in every single county. There are dry counties in Kentucky, and you want to surpass alcohol with marijuana? I don't think that's what's going to work. If you want something to work really well, if you really want to move it forward, you have to be allowing local control by these counties and cities, because if they don't want it going on, they should at least still get the choice if you're going to go ahead and pass it as a state. But, stands to reason, is that even a good idea? Should we be laying fertile ground for this kind of corruption? So here in Kentucky, we have a cap on the licenses they put in place for this medical marijuana, and a tier 1 cultivator. They've said they're only going to hand out 10 of those licenses. So 10 tier 1 cultivators licenses. Now, how many people applied for those 10 cultivator licenses? 239. For the Tier 2 cultivator, there's only 4 of those licenses being handed out. 190 people applied. For Tier 3, there's only 2 licenses being handed out. 155 people applied. For processors, the state has said they're only handing out 10 of those licenses. 333 people applied. And for dispensaries, the state has said they're only handing out 48 licenses for a dispensary. Over 4,000 people applied to run a dispensary here in Kentucky. And a part of that process of applying for these licenses is to go ahead and put forward non-refundable licenses applications. And the state has brought in $27,777,000 in non-refundable licensing fees as of the close of applications for licensing. $27,777,000. Now this should anger everyone. It should anger those who are against the expansion because, well, it just goes to show that for the state, this is about health and wellness at all. The people who said they were for this, people like the governor, people like the legislators who said medical marijuana makes sense and it helps people. They were clearly, they may sort of believe that, and I know the activists do. The activists who want to see this certainly believe that. But the actions out of the state and the legislatures make it clear they do not believe this is about helping people at all. This is a cash grab for the state. Because name another drug, another situation, another dispensary where this is handled this way. Pharmacies, there's no arbitrary limit to the amount of pharmacies allowed to be licensed in an area because nobody would think to limit ability for people to have access to the drugs they need, quote unquote need. The drugs that have been prescribed to them by a doctor. The typical medications that have gone through normal processes and approvals. The drugs that people generally agree are life-saving or helping. Obviously, some people would disagree with certain drugs. But anyways, the point is that the idea that we limit pharmacies, that would be crazy. The idea we limit doctors and cap the amount of doctors actually allowed to operate. Now, we do, through certificate of need, cap who can operate in the healthcare field, but there's no arbitrarily set number. You have to claim that there's a need for it, but it's not like they're like, you can only have 2 hospitals in the state. That's constructively what they do in some areas, but that isn't what they're actually doing. Because that's things that they, as a state, believe are actually helping the people. But for marijuana, it would seem they don't, and never did, believe this was about helping people. This is about making as much money as possible. Because when you also look at the $27 million in non-refundable application fees, there's also, once they grant the licenses, another $11.75 million, so $11,750,000 getting handed in the actual application now. Once they pick you, you now pay that, and now you get to hold your license. So that's $40 million just in licensing fees for this program. That is $500,000 per operator. Because remember, there's an operator at each different level, right? That's for all the licenses they're handing out. They're handing out around 80 total licenses across the cultivators, the processors, the compliance, the dispensaries. That's $500K per license that they've set apart for the year. For the year. $500K. This money, if you believe this medical marijuana is there to help people, this money, this cost will be added on to that drug, will be added on to this drug that you think will help people. And if you're somebody who's against this going on, you should be infuriated because quite clearly this isn't, you've been lied to by people like Bashir claiming this is about helping people. It's not about helping people. It's about the state putting more money into its coffers. In fact, everybody, regardless of where you fall on this issue, should be upset about that. That's why I talk about this. Typically, I don't wade into these kinds of issues too much because there's arguments on all kinds of different sides, and I'd love to moderate a debate on this kind of issue because I truthfully, generally speaking, I'm in the middle. But at the same time, I'm upset when I see these things because government corruption upsets me, and it's no surprise here in Kentucky. I mean, take a look at how we've handled gambling, right? We simultaneously in 2023 banned gray machines, banned those local gambling machines in the gas station because we didn't want to have people to have access to slot machines just around the corner. But then at the same time, we pass a law okaying sports betting that can be done on your phone. At the same year. And the only reason we did that is because the horse parks, who've already paid off, all the politicians and everybody else, they weren't making money off the gray machines in the gas stations, but sports betting has to flow through one of the 7 license holders, which are all horse parks here in Kentucky, in order to be allowed to sports bet in Kentucky. So they're getting cuts off of places like DraftKings and everywhere else when people are placing those sports bets. It's the exact same thing. They're trying to do the exact same thing and turn this into a completely corrupt process. But hey, it's par for the course for Kentucky. Well, coming up after this, we'll be going into DEI offices, going away at colleges and universities. Should we celebrate? We'll have more after this short break. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So last session, 2024 session, we saw 2 DEI bills. One for K-12 education. It went nowhere, which I've said this time and time before on the show, that K-12 education bill should be the most important one because obviously everybody in the state is legally mandated to have some sort of K-12 educational system. Not everybody's mandated to go to college. If we're gonna recognize that these DEI concepts that teach people to categorize people based on their skin color and separate them out and treat them differently, it's all about inclusivity. We need to beat into these gender theory methodologies and this all this crud we're shoving into these kids' heads. If we're gonna address that anywhere, we should be addressing it in K-12 education, but for some reason that didn't happen. Instead, a bill started moving out of the legislature. It started in the Senate dealing with DEI in colleges and universities. And then it went over to the House. There's a little bit of changes made to the bill by Jennifer Decker, where she changed it from being just a bill that was dealing with admission quotas, which the Supreme Court had already ruled was unconstitutional. In fact, the Attorney General through that process came out and said, yeah, this is an unconstitutional process and you're going to have to change your admission regulations because you're taking in certain percentages of people. Because the way it was set up, the Committee on Higher Education Committee on the Council on Post-Secondary Education here in Kentucky that controls the funding, a lot of the funding going on from the state, they were handing out funding based upon hitting certain diversity quotas, like a racial quota. You have to hit bringing in so many students of X skin color. That's clearly unconstitutional. And so the bill was mainly dealing with that. And it was also saying that we could go ahead and, if you're going to be teaching about these DEI processes and DEI classes, you have to give equal viewpoints and a few other things. Well, it went over to the House, and Jennifer Decker did a little bit more with it. In fact, she moved in there to dismantle the DEI offices completely. The schools shouldn't care at all about the race or gender of the people they're bringing in. They should just be caring about bringing in the students that meet their criteria for students, and never mind what they look like. Never mind. On top of that, she also added into it to go ahead and ban the mandatory usage of DEI classes, using that for bringing students in, and they have to take a part of their orientation DEI classes. Well, that became a big problem for Aaron Thompson, who's the chair of Kentucky's Council on Post-Secondary Education. He's also good friends with Robert Stivers, president of the Senate. And the reason why it was a problem, I covered this in depth on my show in an episode that was probably like 6 months ago. So if you want more information on what I'm talking about, head over to theandrewshow.com, hit the Listen Now tab, and you'll have to scroll back a little bit far, but you can listen to old episodes there. But he is actually the author of several books that are used in these DEI, CRT, critical race theory, anti-racism classes that are required in these universities. And so he's making a buck off this DEI stuff, and so banning it would have harmed him. He didn't like the direction that bill was going. He called up Stivers and he told him, do not call that bill forward. The bill didn't get pulled forward because that's where I'm told by the legislators up there that are wondering, because the bill passed the Senate, got changed in the House, passed the House, but then it never got called forward for a vote in the Senate. It's a very weird thing, and legislators were asking time and time again why, and all the legislators I talked to said they were told that Stivers said he didn't want it pulled forward, and it's well documented that Aaron Thompson, the CRT DEI book author, and Stivers are good friends. They both come from Clay County. So in order to avoid that situation, we're seeing universities like UK, Northern Kentucky University, U of L, disbanding their DEI offices. Now you'd think that would be cause for celebration. We're winning. We're getting rid of this DEI in our colleges and universities, but you would be mistaken. What they're doing is they're shucking and driving, and they're trying to take the wind out of the sails for a push in this upcoming session to pass a bill to permanently ban it. It's kind of like, take Facebook or Twitter before Elon Musk took over. Facebook is so afraid of being regulated by the government that when the government calls them up and tells them to go ahead and just regulate this speech for them, they go ahead and do it. Or they'll even regulate some things on their own because they don't want to prompt the federal government coming in and regulating their industry. So they said, look, we'll self-regulate, we'll handle this in order to not be taken with your higher standards. So if the legislature actually passes a bill getting rid of DEI in our universities, it will do far more than them just getting rid of their DEI offices that they have in place right now. So they go ahead and they get rid of these offices, but they're not firing very many people. They might fire one or two, but everybody else is getting moved into different departments within the universities, but fulfilling the same job. None of them are as more obvious and blatant than at U of L. Because U of L went ahead and disbanded their Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and instead put in their Office of Institutional Equity. They literally said, okay, we'll drop diversity, we'll drop inclusion, and we'll go with equity. That's the word nobody has a problem with, right? But of course, that's false. If anything, the word we most have a problem with is equity. That's a problem. And for those of you who don't realize why equity is the problem, diversity, a little bit, they think diversity is the problem because they think they buy into the leftist agenda that we're all about, we're afraid of diversity because we're all racist or something. But diversity that we care about, at least I do as a conservative, is diversity of thought. If I'm putting together an organization, I want a diversity of actual life experiences and a diversity of actual thoughts. Not diversity in your skin hue. Because I could hire both a white person, a black person, an Asian person, a Hispanic person, and if they all grew up in an upper class neighborhood on the East Coast, they're all going to have the same general viewpoint, regardless of their skin color. So diversity isn't scary. If you're categorizing people though based upon immutable characteristics and calling that diversity, that's wrong. That's what we have a problem with. But actually, equity is of the biggest issue. For those of you who are unaware what equity is, it's far different than equality. Equality means we all have the same opportunity. Everybody has the same opportunity as long as they hit the standards to go to, let's for an example, U of L. As long as you hit the standards, you should be allowed in to the university. That's equality, everybody having equal opportunity. But equity means it's not about opportunity, it's about the endpoint, making sure that every single person ends at the same place. And that's the real big problem. That's the quote-unquote communism of the entire thing. The idea that we all need to end up in the same place, because that takes away the freedom of decisions. That's where we have the real issue. But putting that to the side, they're only doing this to distract the legislators away from going ahead and passing a piece of legislation this session. And so to you legislators that I know listen to the show and watch the show, and to those of you who call in to your legislators, those of you who email them and reach out to them, and if you don't know how to, you just head on over to LRC and you can find your legislator there and be able to go ahead and reach out to them. But reach out to them and tell them, don't buy it. Put in place, still pass a bill dealing with the concepts of DEI, dealing with these concepts of categorizing people based upon their skin color. Deal with these concepts of pushing these one solitary liberal viewpoints. Because that's the other thing that these DEI bills included, was a requirement for diversity of viewpoint on campus, to allow the diversity of viewpoint. That teachers couldn't teach things as facts when in fact there is another viewpoint. They have to present those as well. Because of course, we're not here to teach people what to think, but how to think. That's what university is supposed to be for, right? Well, giving them that diverse viewpoint is so crucial there. So tell your legislators, don't be bought off by them dismantling their DEI departments. It's not a win. They're trying to convince you it is. It's not. They're trying to get us to stop our march of forcing them to stop pushing these liberal, crazy DEI, CRT agendas on kids and turning them all into people that categorize individuals based on their gender and race. And that is wrong, it's racist, it's immoral, and it needs to stop. Well, coming up after this, we'll be digging into some of the arguments regarding gun laws that have resurfaced. We'll have that after this short break. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So obviously there was a school shooting this past week or so in Georgia that I'm sure many of you heard about. And also here in Kentucky, there was a shooting on I-75. Now, typically, I wouldn't go into talking about gun control and why it doesn't solve these issues so soon after a shooting. Typically, I like to stay away from the emotionally charged time, but it didn't take long for individuals on the left to go ahead and politicize this shooting. Now, of course, they're going to back off the Georgia shooting, I think, pretty soon. I'm starting to see reports on Twitter and other places. I don't know if you all are, but I'm starting to see reports that the individual who did the shooting in Georgia was actually identified as a trans individual. Was a guy who identified as a girl and was supposedly trans and gay. I'm seeing some screenshots of reportedly his Twitter statements from his father that are circulating regarding him being bullied for being gay. And so, are we seeing another one of these trans shootings? This would be the third, right? Because the Donald Trump shooter, I think, too, as well. I'd seen some evidence was possibly themselves identified as trans or a part of the LGBTQ community. But anyway, so we're seeing that be a possibility. And if that becomes more than just alleged, but 100% fact, and it gets admitted to by the mainstream media, we're going to see them stop really talking about that shooting because it doesn't fall as well into, of course, their agenda. But they didn't take any time. I've seen time and time again posts, as soon as this shooting happened on I-75, we have no idea the situation behind it. We have no idea anything about how the individual got their guns and their background. In fact, at the time I'm recording this, the individual hasn't even been caught yet to really even question them. I've seen some reports of some background issues, having been arrested for perhaps some crimes that would preclude them from being able to purchase a firearm anyways. But putting all that to the side, I'm seeing so many claims about, we need to ban guns or ban assault rifles, or we need to ban this or ban that. And to me, I think those arguments are not helpful at all. I think they're actually the least helpful arguments that could be. In fact, if you want to guarantee that more of these shootings occur, spend your time arguing about that instead of about real and actual solutions. And I'll tell you why it's not worthwhile to go ahead and do so. And that is because, first, there's a real substantive problem here with how do you define an assault rifle? How do you actually take steps that go ahead and end that shooting? I'll tell you what I mean here. So this is a standard AR-15. Yes, this is a very cheap, for those of you who know their guns, AR-15. But this is a pretty standard AR-15. It shoots a .223 round. So if you said, and I see people call .223 a high caliber round. Anybody who knows guns knows that these .223s don't work as a high caliber. I wouldn't call this a high caliber round at all. I'll show you some high caliber rounds here in a second. But this is standard AR-15. So you say, I want to ban this. Well, what part of it do you want to ban? Do you want to ban the fact that it's automatic? Well, that then leads into problems. How would you ban that and not this? This right here is a Stoeger M3500. This is my standard hunting shotgun that I use for everything from doves to turkeys to goose to shooting clays and everything else. It is a semi-automatic shotgun that shoots a 12 gauge round. So if you're to define this and say, okay, we want a semi-automatic gun, we want to get rid of that in long gun form. Well, my standard hunting shotgun, the same exact shotgun that is used by, not exactly the same M3500, but a semi-automatic shotgun is literally used by tons of hunters. It's one of the most common shotguns used for hunting. And the time and time again, the claims made by those who want to ban guns is that we don't want to ban hunting guns. We just want to ban weapons of war. So you go ahead and you say, well, we're going to just, okay, we can't define it as semi-automatic if that's our goal. So instead, we're going to go ahead and we're going to define it as maybe magazine capacity. Yeah, sure. We're going to ban high capacity magazines. Well, what does that even mean? Now, according to standard definitions, if you Google what is a high capacity magazine, they'd say a magazine that is larger than the weapon was originally designed to go with. Well, the problem there is that the magazine that the AR-15 is designed to go with is a 30-round magazine. So maybe you go ahead and say, you know what, fine, we'll just claim that you can't have more than 15 rounds. Okay, we'll just call a high-capacity magazine anything more than 15 rounds. Well, this right here is a standard Glock 17, which is chambered in 9mm. And a standard Glock 17 magazine holds 17 rounds plus one. So now, and a Glock 17 is a very common gun, a standard now Glock magazine, which literally there's tons of them out there. Well, we need to go ahead and get rid of those if you want to ban anything over 15 rounds. So maybe you say, okay, you know what? I'm going to make it about caliber. Then you can't have a semi-automatic weapon that's in a caliber more than the AR-15 caliber. Well, the problem becomes is that, well, now you get into something like the 308, which is what's chambered in both my longer range hunting rifle, which is a bolt action, which they don't want to ban, they say, because it's a standard hunting rifle, but it's also used on my AR-10. And my AR-10, you'll see I actually took and hunted a deer with. There's a good reason why you would use this for hunting, because you need something that fires a little bit faster and can get rounds down, especially when you're hog hunting and carry several rounds. Anybody who's been hog hunting before will tell you, you are lucky if one round can actually take down a hog. I've seen a hog take 3, 4, 5 rounds. I've seen it take a round of 308 to the head and then take 4 or 5 rounds of 300 blackout before, and it still didn't die right away and was able to stand back up and would have been a danger to those who are hunting it. So unless you want hogs to just go crazy, which we could go into all the troubles there, well, you don't want to ban AR-10s and you can't ban the round, but let's just say you get rid of all of it. You say, you know what, you're good with just your not semi-automatic weapons. That'll handle it. But now you run into a problem of, is it speed of shooting? Because here we have my other deer rifle, which is a 30-30 lever action, very common deer rifle. Let me show you how fast some people can shoot firearms like these.
I'm ready. Stand by.
That's pretty quick. So maybe you say, okay, well, you can only have bolt action rifles. Well, let me tell you about something called the AR pistol. In fact, the ATF has had a hard time themselves defining what a pistol is. Because here's a AR-15 pistol. Now, there are specific rules about pistols. They can't be, shouldered, they say. And so all an AR-15 pistol basically is a AR-15 with a short barrel and without a stock on it. But it still has a buffer tube, or it can have a brace on it that can attach to your forearm that looks like something. That's not it looks like a stock, but it's really a brace. You can also put a blade on it, but you just can't have an adjustable stock like you have on a typical AR-15. And so that now becomes a problem because the ATF themselves is having a hard time defining what a pistol is. And so in order to craft a law that properly deals with all of this, you would have to limit people to a bolt action rifle and a pump or double barrel or single barrel shotgun. That'd be all you're left with. But there's a real problem with the mechanics of banning them. There's almost 600 million firearms in rotation. And if I had to guess, I'd say maybe only 10 to 15% of them actually fulfill if you were to just limit it down to simply bolt action rifles and pump shotguns, double barrels, or single barrel shotguns. How are you going to collect over 400 million firearms? How are you going to do that? There is a real problem with your plan. It's kind of like you've walked into a house that's flooding and there's a person next to you who says, the best idea I have is that we should go back in time and turn off the water. Well, that really doesn't solve our problem now, does it? Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Thank you all so much for joining me. We'll be back here tomorrow. Hope you have a great rest of your day.